Welcome again, everybody. Slight correction from the previous video. I think I've said source venv bin activate, but for Windows, in order to get into your virtual environment, for Windows, that is apparently just like this or like this, something along those lines. Now, since I'm not a Windows user, or I use it occasionally, but very rarely, especially not for coding, I may occasionally say things that, you know, with regards to running an application, installing some modules or vice versa, any code that's other than the Python code that we're typing in, any commands that we're typing in, it may be slightly different on Windows, and there may be issues with regards to that. So just keep that at the back of your mind. If perhaps something isn't working, that's a possibility. Maybe if there's an episode that I'm doing on, let's say, installing Python, you may want to see like if we used a terminal or a command line for anything. Perhaps something went wrong there, and think maybe this is done differently on Windows. Just something to keep in mind. I'll try to do my best to, in those times, to do something that works for both Windows and Linux as well. Anyways, we're gonna open up our terminal, and we're gonna continue. Again, source venv bin activate for me, but again, venv bin activate for Windows. It looks like. And from here, we're going to open up our Chrome. We'll enter guest mode. You don't have to enter guest mode. I'm just entering guest mode for the sake of this tutorial. And we go to localhost 5000. Nothing is there. We run Python, my first app, and there we go. Localhost 5000 works successfully, just fine. Okay, one more thing we need is we need to actually have the ability to edit. There we go. Perfect. So we're going to first do a tiny rundown of what exactly is going on here. So from Flask import Flask, what this is Flask is the library. It's a Python library just like any other library. If you used Python before, I'm sure you've imported some libraries in the past. For example, you might have imported Beautiful Soup, you might have imported Request, you might have imported maybe bcrypt. This is just indifferently. It's the library's Flask, and we're importing the Flask class. We're later using this Flask class that we've just imported over here to make a Flask object. Instance of a Flask class. So it requires one argument to be passed in, and this argument is the name. Most cases you just want to do underscore underscore name underscore underscore. I think you can put anything in here as a string, but what this does is it names the application underscore underscore main. Now you can test this out if you want to. You know what? Sure, let's test it. I don't want to take too much time, but if we did print underscore underscore name, okay, and we just deleted all of this code momentarily, and we went over here, all it does when we run our application is underscore underscore main. The reason for that is because this is a special keyword in Python, which essentially, if you're running a script like we're doing over here, it will make the script called main no matter what. Maybe no matter what, if you really play with it, you can change it and vice versa, but the general rule is the script that you're running is always going to be called underscore underscore main, and this is to distinguish this script that you're running, your Python web app, from other files that may be imported. So if at any point anybody wants to import this file, they can distinguish it by putting this little check. Does the current, this is the if condition, that is the famous if condition, if the current file's name is equal to main. And once you do this, this will only run if the file that is being executed is actually the file that the parent file, the one that you're running over here. So in other words, once we do this, this is going to be the main file. But if this is importing Flask, it's going to be called Flask. If it's importing some other library, if any code is in there to make that should only be run if it's run directly. It's basically isolating that. So this is kind of like an unnecessary little concept. I don't want to dive too much into it, but in any case, this is where we were, right? Okay, yeah. In any case, that's what that is. So the reason that Flask is taking this is because that's the one parameter that it has. So it wants to take the main, and in the future, it can basically, if you have multiple Flask objects, vice versa, I'm sure it can be useful in those situations. But this is the main. This is the only thing that you need to give to Flask in order to have it up and running and working. So we do app equals Flask, and we do underscore underscore name underscore underscore. Again, this is the same as doing this for now anyways. In fact, let's give it a shot. It's the same as doing that for now because, you know, it only matters in bigger projects when you're importing stuff left and right and you're, you know, so it's not that important at the moment, but this is conventional, so we may as well just keep this, and I don't want to dive too much into detail to bore you. We basically can now use this app variable as a Flask object, and that's why we're able to do this thing here called app.route. Now route is a function of app. It's a decorator function, which means that once we put something in here, okay, we put a function under it, and this decorator will take this homepage function. You can kind of visualize this as if it's like this. It's giving the homepage function right here. Okay, this is kind of an easier way to visualize things. More or less, what this means is every time that this route is visited, which is actually this route right here. If we made this, for example, profile, it's going to be not found. If we change this to profile, refresh the page here, there you go. So this is literally the route that's over here. What we're telling Flask is every time this place is visited, do this, right? Which is why I want you to visualize this at the moment like this. Because it more or less, if the app wasn't here, this is kind of another way that, you know, that you can go about it. Obviously, it's a decorator function. Flask is using decorator functions. This is pretty much the most important thing in Flask to learn. Once you learn this, I mean, everything, if you know Python already, everything else is pretty self-explanatory. You can literally just do, you know, and you can do a million different options here. I mean, if we wanted to, for example, do a request to another website here, we could do that. We could print 5 for whatever reason, and just to show the proof of concept, when we visit this profile page, every time we visit it, it prints 5 over on the left. The reason for that is because every time we visit this profile page, it runs the code inside this function, and then at the end it returns something, and that something, if it's a string, is interpreted by Flask automatically and rendered as HTML. So as you can see, we have h1 tags here. If we were to remove those, it would just be straight up it were without any type of fancy styling. In fact, we can even put CSS in here. If we want to add some CSS, we can do style, and we can do, you know, background color blue. There we go. Make the color white. Make it look however you want. You know, CSS works just fine inside here, because this is just a straight up regular HTML. Now, we're not going to write all of our HTML code here. That would be, it's possible, but it's not, it's definitely, it's going to get too long, you know. You're going to start going, and if you want to write it, you do it with these three quotation marks, and you can keep going at it. You know, you can keep writing your HTML code here, and keep writing, and in the end, sure, I mean, it does the job, sort of. But in large projects, you want to separate your HTML into HTML files themselves instead of putting it all here. And that'll also give you a nice format, and it'll make this all Python code, and that way you can render something called a template. So we'll show that in future episodes. But if you do something like this, right, you can put all of this code in here. And you can even render render for loops and things like that using Jinja. It's gonna get very fun if you stick around. But for now, what's important is let's take this all back. Let's have our HTML a little bit simpler, single line HTML like so. This is how a route works and functions. More or less, this is all you need to know for the moment being, for this tutorial's sake. And I hope this concept was somewhat clear for you to understand that. This function here returns something, and that something is what the people are going to get when they go over to this route here, which is /profile, right? And because of this the function that's put right under this app.route is going to be taken, and it's kind of going to be embedded inside this function, the route. It's a function of app. So if we weren't to have this, right, we would think of this like an app.route being a function of app, and it's indifferent here except because of the at. I don't know if how familiar you are with decorators, but this is going to be embedded inside it. Our last line here is app.run debug true. Now we don't have to do this normally. What we can instead do is, okay, so when we run our app, if we don't run it from here, okay, if we don't do the app.run, it's never going to run. However, we can do this, Flask run debug, but it's unable to find our Flask app because our app is called my first app and it can't know that. So that's why we Flask app my first app run debug. So in cases like this where you haven't named your app some of the generic names such as app.py or wsgi.py, you're going to have to specify your Flask app's name if you're using the command Flask to run it. And on Windows, you're going to have to do this as a module. So you're going to do Python 3-m Flask run, and before Flask run, if it's not app.py, app my first app, and then run with debug mode, and this would be the command for Windows. It also works here because all we're doing is we're just running Flask as a module. But this is something you don't need to do if you put this thingy right here, the app.run debug true. This has problems, as we've talked about in larger projects. You should do, if you're going to take this approach, you should do this, just in case. If the project gets big and you're importing stuff around and things like that, this is conventional. It's good to do. You have to pick one. Either you do this approach, or you do the Flask approach. This one here, right? So the Flask approach is what I use generally speaking, but this is also something that you can use if you would like. In any case, that comes to the end of our basic get routes video. In future, we're going to go over different things we can do, accepting and handling post requests, for example, and checking the requests method and doing different actions based on that, handling forms, all sorts of fun stuff. And we're going to be able to do some calculations and some stuff in here, and then be able to embed that into our HTML, add some dynamic functionality. In the future, we're going to be integrating databases, so stay tuned. And I appreciate that you're taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, criticisms, the comment section is open for you, and I wish you all the best. Peace.